Now, the US President Donald Trump says he is pissed off with the Russian President Vladimir Putin and will impose secondary tariffs of up to 50% on buyers of Russian oil if he feels Moscow is blocking his efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Trump saying he's very angry after Putin criticised the credibility of the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership. All that as the US has adopted a more conciliatory stance towards Russia that's left Western allies wary as he tries to broker an end to Moscow's three-year-old war in Ukraine. And it all comes as China's foreign minister, Wang is in Russia to meet with his counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. Ukraine very much on the agenda with European countries like France, whose foreign minister met with Wang himself in Beijing this week, hoping China can use its influence to push Vladimir Putin to agree to sit down for extensive ceasefire talks. Well, Oliver Farry from our International Affairs Desk is joining me here on set now. Oliver, can we expect China to play this persuasive role that European countries are obviously hoping he's going to do?
Well, probably not as much as Europe hopes it would. China is a fairly consistent believer of not interfering in other countries' internal affairs, so it's hard to see Wang Yi pushing Russia too hard on this. That said, there might be a few gentle nudges in that direction, but the emphasis is very much on gentle. China, even if it wished to use any leverage with Moscow, doesn't actually have an awful lot. Relations between the two countries have never been closer ever since that meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin on the eve of the 2022 Olympics in Beijing. And trade is at its highest too. We can see here that 2024 saw record trade between the two countries. Chinese customs figures reported $237 billion in bilateral trade. But if we go deeper into that, we find that it's actually quite balanced. And in fact, Russian exports slightly edge out Chinese ones. Now, there is a caveat there. Probably a lot of Chinese exports are dissimulated. They're rerouted through third countries so as to skirt sanctions. But even so, the very fact that China has provided a lifeline to Russia's economy, and Russia's economy has not collapsed during the past 3 years of war, it means that neither side can really afford to have a rift that by strong-arming the other. Will China try to cajole Putin into going along with the ceasefire talks or maybe an eventual deal? That is possible. Now, China is rightly accused of cynicism in its positions on the Ukraine war, but it does have a genuine interest in having a settlement in international stability, and so they probably would get behind some sort of settlement. Whether it's a settlement that benefits Ukraine, however, is another thing.
China says it's neutral, of course, in the war in Ukraine. The West not convinced about that, though.
Yeah, as I said earlier, China doesn't like to wade in on other people's affairs because they don't like other countries doing it to them. But the reality is that this impassiveness can be construed as active support, especially when it is backing up Moscow's line that NATO enlargement is a cause of this war. The West also accuses it of providing material support to Moscow's war efforts. That's something that China denies. Reuters reported last year that European intelligence sources said that Russia was developing and producing long-range attack drones for use in the war in Ukraine in China. Now, the European Union has thus questioned its neutrality in the war. China has also not put much daylight between itself and Russia since the start of the war. Washington has also accused China of actually having foreknowledge of the war and that it asked Russia to hold off till the end of the 2022 Beijing Olympics to invade. This is something that Russia did not do the last time Beijing hosted the Olympics in 2008, when on the second day they invaded Georgia. China has plotted its course of studied neutrality. It abstains from any UN motions condemning the invasion. This doesn't convince the West. But Ukraine is also still very, very careful about criticising China because it sees that ultimately it might actually have to call upon it too.
And Ukraine, not the only thing playing on China's mind. I mean, Donald Trump's rapprochement with Moscow also presents something of a challenge, doesn't it?
Yeah, this is what makes this visit by Wang Yi to Moscow particularly interesting, because China is now grappling with a reconfiguration of the relationship between the US and Russia. Now, Donald Trump's gambit may not be a strategic masterstroke, but it does have the effect of doing what some commentators have called a reverse Nixon. Now, Richard Nixon's opening to Mao Zedong back in the 1970s exploited at the time a growing rift between China and the Soviet Union. Now he's going in the other direction. This has not had a noticeable effect yet on Russo-Chinese relations, but it's surely going to complicate things for Beijing. Trump has made no secret of his admiration for Vladimir Putin, his comments yesterday notwithstanding, and his administration has shown itself to actually want to open up more to Moscow. Now, while China might profess to prefer a multilateral world order, there is a danger that in this particular relationship it could get sidelined. And one thing that it will have noticed is that Donald Trump's talking down and upbraiding of his European allies, telling them that don't expect America to always be there. This has not been matched by Trump and his administration in Asia, or at least not yet. So China is definitely has an eye on the fact that just because Trump might be opening up a little bit more in Europe, it doesn't necessarily mean he's going to take the foot off the gas, so to speak, in Asia. So this is definitely something that's well worth watching in this particular visit.
Oliver.